Hey, Mike from the Fulcrum here. I was just out for a drive and stopped in one of my local cafes for coffee and bumped into someone I hadn't seen in years. It's always fun to catch up with people, especially if you had like a long-term history off and on. Now, I know he always looked at me as being almost some kind of a conspiracy theorist, which basically, I guess from his standpoint, would probably be true. But in my own case, anything that seemed to smell a bit off always got me curious as to what's this all about? What's the full story? It's like they say with history, there's your side, their side, and somewhere in the middle lies the truth. Well, anyway, we're having coffee, and he's giving me this kind of a funny look, and all of a sudden he says, "You know what?" I said, "What?" He goes, "You know, you've been right." I said, "Well, right about what? I mean, we've talked about a pile of shit over the years. What do you mean?" He goes, "Damn near everything." He said, he said, like, even years ago, you were talking about things like UFOs and stuff you would like only hear on these conspiracy talk radio guys that were on in the middle of the night. And I said, "Yeah, well, I've always found it interesting. And one clue I always thought about was if someone's trying so very hard to block attention to something or divert away from it, there must be some truth to it." And he goes, "Yeah, but I just can't seem to shake this feeling. I watch the news these days, and for the first time," he said, "what they were talking about on the news didn't match what I saw about that event because I was there." And I said, "Well, what event was that?" And he goes, "Well, I was at the truckers' protests a couple of years ago in Ottawa, and I heard all these stories about Nazi sympathizers and people desecrating the war memorial and all kinds of tension. And I went down, and a lot of peaceful people walking around, free hamburgers, bouncy castles, and actually veterans guarding the memorials and people shoveling up the streets." He says, "I've never seen the streets in Ottawa that clean in my entire life. I mean, there was no snow anywhere. It was like 10, 15 below zero, and these people are out cooking free meals and helping one another out. And I'm sure they were honking their horns and everything, but I didn't see any dangerous terrorists or Nazis walking around. I didn't see any of that. It was like a winter carnival. The only thing lacking was the canal wasn't cleared off, so you could skate." I just let him kind of ramble on about it, and I said, "So it just took this one time that the narrative you saw on the news didn't match what you saw." He said, "Well, it's not only that." He said, "Because of that one time, I got thinking about a lot of other things that had come to light that kind of were just glossed over, or virtually every news station was saying it was the opposite of what it might have been." I said, "Well, yeah, that happens a lot. But generally, if you find everybody is one side or the other and there's no room in the middle for discussion, you're generally looking at some kind of psyop." So he said, "Okay, how do I determine what's real?" And I said, "Well, the rule of thumb that I use is that anytime there's only one narrative on the news, and anyone who comes on and tries to bring any discussion to the topic with an alternative view or other views gets shouted down and demonized, then you have to begin to think that possibly there's something to the fishiness of the story. You're generally looking at some kind of psyop." Going to put his coffee down and said, "Well, there you go again. It's a conspiracy kind of thing." And I said, "No, it's just if you look at propagandists throughout history, their very writings indicate what's going on. I mean, you look in the run-up to World War II, you had heads of Hitler's administration saying things like, well, the average man really doesn't want to fight a war with anyone. You have to give them someone to blame for their own personal problems, whether they're poor or not getting enough to eat or they've been laid off or somebody's doing better than them. You give them the enemy and you tell the lie, and if it's a big enough lie and you tell it often enough, they believe it. All this is a matter of history. Nothing really strange or conspiratorial about it. I can see he felt a little bit off about all of this because imagine it's a shock to your system. It'd be like kind of finding out that your favorite uncle liked to dress in diapers and pretend he was a baby or something outlandish like that. I said, well, don't let it worry you. He said, yeah, but if you've been delving into this all these years, how do you keep sane? I kind of looked at him and I said, what makes you think I am? I said, you either have to have a sense of humor and start laughing about all this, or it will drive you crazy. The way I look at it anymore is that none of this stuff is new. It's all more or less gone below the surface for years and years and years. It's always been going on. A certain amount of the media has always been basically controlled by government through threat or by appointment or by infiltration of government agencies or simply with money. If your income base is basically advertising, the advertisers kind of tell you what tune you can play. And if, for example, you have 90% of your broadcasts being supported by advertising for one or two different types of industries, be it pharmaceutical, automotive, chemical, tobacco, whatever, you know you're not going to get the straight story. You're going to get the story from the slant of whatever person sponsors that show. And it makes sense. It's like, all these old sayings. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune. Nothing new. So the rest of our little coffee break got onto a more friendly note after that. And he just kind of like give me odd looks every now and again and shaking his head. Finally, I said, what? What's going on? He goes, now, he says, I thought there were rules in the world that if you did certain things would happen. And the older I get, the more I see that if there are any rules, they're not made for people like you and me. They're made by the ones that are further up in control of things. And how do we know any of it's true? Or the fact that these rules that we've been following all these years really account for much? I said, well, that's the question. You have to figure out what rules work for you and stick to them. So anyway, I found it was interesting, that talk, because to see someone whose eyes and motivations have been opened to critical thought that normally just kind of went with the flow, and they had obvious reasons for going with the flow. They were doing well with their occupation, making good money, nice house, kids, the right cars, the right clothes for years and years and years. And all of a sudden, these things are starting to be basically stripped away one by one. When it gets to the point where it affects your peace of mind, then you really do start to have second thoughts. Anyway, as always, breathe deep, think clearly. We try not to worry too much. And as I said in the last video, just turn that shit off. Go enjoy your life.